today, Tara. I know that you have a lot to share with us. So I'd like to start by introducing you and welcoming our guests who've joined us today. On behalf of the TLPDC and the Teaching Academy, this is our Commitment to Teaching series. We're so excited about this series and the variety of workshops that we have that help us consider student learning, technology, and our own well-being. A part of that well-being may be the multiple hats that we're wearing at this time. So perhaps you're here today because you're responsible for not just teaching here at Texas Tech, but you're on your own online schooling for your family. So today we have Dr. Tara Stevens sharing her perspective about her experiences learning and schooling at home. Dr. Stevens is in the Texas Tech College of Education. She's in the Educational Psychology and Leadership program, and she also is our faculty ombudsperson. So it is with appreciation that we welcome Dr. Stevens and thank her in advance for sharing her ideas with us.
Thanks, Suzanne. I found it interesting to create this presentation because in 20 years in academia, I think this is the first presentation I've created that actually has pictures of my child in it. So I took full advantage, and I'm not going to apologize. So you're going to see a lot of images of my kid. I do want to start by sharing what I hope I don't communicate. I believe in the importance of the role of public schools in a democratic society. So when I'm telling you that I homeschool and we focus on learning and schooling at home, it's not a commentary on how I feel about public school. And it's not really a commentary on how I feel about the quality of public education. These are important conversations to have, but I don't want to have those today. And I don't want you to think that I'm saying something about them. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. I also do want to acknowledge up front that I realize that I'm coming from an incredible place of privilege. The things that we're able to do at home, what we can afford to do, the flexibility and time that I have, the online services that we have, I realize that what I say I'm doing is not necessarily what I believe, everybody should be doing this. I understand that I'm very fortunate. And so I actually consider homeschooling a luxury. So I will point out to you some of the cost. I'll be straightforward and tell you what we pay for some of these programs. There are some that are free and some that are kind of expensive. And so I'll be upfront about that. So I just want to quickly share with you a little bit about where I come from, because it does lend some insight into why I'm probably so willing to do some of the things that I do. I have a public school background. My dad didn't graduate from high school. I grew up in a town of about 2,000 people. There were 20 kids in my class. And so I'm pretty comfortable with a small school environment and looking at education and learning in informal ways. I did move when I moved into high school, and I was in a class of about then 220 students, which I found very uncomfortable. And so it's not surprising that I would gravitate towards small types of learning environments. My husband also graduated from a very, very small middle school in Texas, which maybe about 15 students in his class. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind. And I noticed Stacy, I think, is attending today, and here's his picture. And so I also have a professional background in education. I'm a licensed specialist in school psychology. That's the other term that you're familiar with is probably school psychologist. We just don't call ourselves that in Texas. So I have a wide experience working in public schools since 1995, predominantly rural and small schools. I worked predominantly with children with extreme emotional and behavioral problems. I worked with a large number of teachers across a large number of campuses across, you know, kindergarten through high school. So I have a breadth of knowledge of what happens in classrooms and the challenges that teachers and educators, administrators face. From a research perspective, a lot of content is math education. I was co-PI on a couple of projects that involved training teachers, especially emphasizing the importance of conceptual knowledge and mathematics over just teaching process. I've worked with in publications involving special populations. My recent research focuses on aggression directed towards teachers and teacher trauma. So a lot of teachers, but you can obviously tell experiences and are very different than other people's experiences. You'll see this photograph. This is one of my students who finished his dissertation defense. He actually heads up the one of the larger. We'll fast forward through this background part. We get it. I have a different sort of background. So what I'm going to start with is actually a story because I think it illustrates a lot about schooling and learning at home. And I call this the AP biology argument. And I see some STEM people here, so you might appreciate this, this discussion. So we started homeschooling in 8th grade, and my daughter is a sophomore now. And she has a background in private and public school. And last year, when she started as a freshman, I decided it would be a good idea for her to take an advanced placement biology class. And advanced placement is, if you aren't familiar, is a coursework that is taught by a highly trained teacher, a specialized teacher. These courses are often taught in public schools. They are approved by the College Board. Once you complete the course, they're very rigorous. Once you complete the course, you take an exam at the end of the academic year. And if you pass at a certain level, you may be eligible for college credit. So for AP biology, many universities with a very high score on the exam will award as much as 8 hours of college credit. Typically, students take AP biology when they are a junior or senior in high school. And it tends to be considered one of the more difficult advanced placement classes, which is, I don't know why I thought it was a great idea for my daughter to take it in her freshman year. So we had a long-standing argument over the year. Last year was pretty challenging. So talking about, was she ready for AP biology? So we have to kind of back up and have a conversation about what happens in elementary school. So when my daughter started school, I believe in STEM, and I believe in STEM education. But you'll notice that, and many of you with younger children, you'll notice that in elementary school, there's not a lot of science that's taught. It's often treated as an elective. The focus is really on reading. And probably like many of you, we read a lot. And so my daughter's reading was actually pretty strong. So I really wish there would have been science. At one school, they were supposed to be doing some science projects that were supposed to be independent. That never happened. As she got a little bit older, she became involved in science fair. That was nice. We have a few rats at home now that we inherited from the science teacher. They have an incredibly long life for 2 rats. So we're into science, but as far as a curriculum, we're just kind of getting piecemeal. So one of the first things we did when we decided we would homeschool was we would start with science. So we started this summer before my daughter started 8th grade. So pick out, I hope you're picking up a few things here. I'm talking about curriculum and the way that I disagreed with curriculum, how it is that we're taking advantage of time. So we enrolled her in something called TTU ISD. Some of you might be familiar that Texas, maybe you don't know that Texas Tech has an ISD. It's K-12 now. I think they call it something different. And we enrolled her in the first semester of 8th grade science. She had a certified teacher. If you are full-time in this program, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit, your student takes STAR exams, and it is an ISD, and you go in, and she took a proctored exam at the end of the semester, and she did well. But I thought, if we're going to homeschool, we could do a lot of hands-on stuff. We could do things at home. This could be fun. So we didn't enroll in the second semester. But instead, we use some other programs. So there's a program called CK12. There's a platform called study.com that have courses that are tied to standardized curriculum, right? Common Core and TEKS. We're going to talk about those also this morning, that we had access to a full online textbook. I ordered a textbook, I ordered beakers, I ordered a microscope. I have a really beautiful card deck of the periodic table. We also downloaded from the American Chemical Society. They have a complete middle school curriculum. And the middle school curriculum comes with remote learning lessons and actual lesson plans, videos for when we actually couldn't do the experiments, but we did all of these experiments in our kitchen. And we were covering what I knew to be the curriculum, because the curriculum is available online. There are also other resources that we use, the Everything Science, right, which is a pretty good, very popular among homeschoolers. It's a book series that you can buy on Amazon that help us make sure that we are covering all of our content area. And we were, I thought, doing a great thing. We also took advantage of TTU outreach. So Ellie was enrolled in science. It's a girl thing. She attended text prep one summer, and she went to something called She Space, which involved Dr. Arden Dreyer, who actually you should see in your email, because she's doing a presentation on dust particles, which also we listened to her talk about dust particles. We went to Science by the Glass. So tech offers a lot of fun things that you can take advantage of with your kids. And so we did this, and I thought, we're ready for AP biology. I opened up the syllabus from Florida Virtual School and said, we covered all of these things. This was our curriculum. There's ionic bonding, there's, this is great. So Florida Virtual School is Florida's kind of ISD. Florida requires that all school students actually have to take an online course, but they also cater to global. So they actually contract with some public schools that don't have AP coursework. And as a result, you can enroll in these classes. They are actually College Board approved. She had an actual teacher. We met with the teacher via phone before we started the course. She also completed what's called DBAs, or discussion-based assessments, regularly, which meant that she had a phone call scheduled with the teacher and verbally discussed the content, in addition to working through a platform, taking exams, etc. So this was her AP course, which was through Florida Virtual School. She actually took two. And so this was very challenging. And it all kind of started with the lab partner, Min from Tennessee. So my daughter got connected with another student to do her projects with, and she discovered that Min had taken multiple AP classes. Min is actually a rural. She goes to school in a rural area in Tennessee, and her school didn't offer AP. So she was taking, so again, kind of listen here, she was taking AP courses in addition to her high school coursework. And Min told her that I already had biology in my high school. So all of what this content is covering, I'm very familiar with it. So Ellie was pretty upset. She said, Mom, I should have taken biology in high school before I took AP biology. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, well, yeah, she might be right, but I wasn't going to admit it. So we actually argued consistently. We had conversations about, well, how are you studying? She would read, and she would just read over and over again. I was like, well, that's not how you study. So there are other tools. So we talked about studying. One day we went out and we were walking along, and she's lamenting that she doesn't have any roly-polies. Like, well, why do you need roly-polies? Well, we have to do a roly-poly experiment. And so we take walks in the middle of the day. So this was part of our discussion. And so we're walking along, and I was like, oh, she says, what's this? There's something on the sidewalk. It was a bug. And I'm like, okay, well, I think that's a roly-poly. And she's, no, it's not. A poke it didn't roll up. So we keep walking. And so we're having this conversation. Well, does Min have access to roly-polies? Can we order roly-polies? I'm like, how do we get this experiment done? And I look down and I see something else. I'm like, that's a roly-poly. I'm from Kansas. Those are roly-polies. And so we actually counted about 8 on our walk alone. So she's lamenting an experiment while we're walking that she thinks she cannot do because she doesn't have access to things. She's given up before she tries. She's not studying. At the midterm, I discovered that she was taking all of her exams with her books closed when they were open book exams. So we argued all year. We struggled all year. And at one point, I remember going through a pothole of all things. And I asked her, well, what do you think made that pothole? And this goes back to 8th grade science. We were talking about water and the attributes of water, and that when water freezes, it expands. And so I expected her to give me this scientific answer, and I got I don't know. And suddenly it occurred to me that all of these things that we did in 8th grade, maybe she didn't learn them. Maybe I learned them. Maybe I was having a good time. It made me think a lot about what happens at school. So much repetition in school, so many times that you take the same curriculum over and over again. Maybe I did push for AP biology. It did turn out that she did well. She ended up with an 89 of all things in the class, but she did pass. She is eligible for college credit. But I tell this story, this struggle that we had all year. And in the end, I began to think about what's the difference between schooling and learning. So I was just talking at her. I wasn't making sure that she was making connections to what she was learning, that it was meaningful to her. And that bothered me. And I thought, I'm a failure as a homeschooling parent. And, I pushed her into something early. What is this all about? But then I started to compare that to schooling. Would it be any different if she were in a classroom with 20 other students? How would we have had conversations about her studying? How would we have had conversations about her confidence? Would I have known to have those conversations? So in the end, I still think we won. I still think it was a good idea to do AP biology because we learned a lot, and we learned a lot together. So I share this story because I want to share that this isn't easy, that this is a challenge. There's a difference between schooling, just going through content, and actually making connections and learning things. There's also a wide variety of issues that are really here. There's issues with curriculum. I didn't want to use the curriculum. I wanted the curriculum of public schools to be a bit different. I wished I would have addressed that earlier when she was in elementary school. I felt like she needed to do hands-on as well as online. And there are ways to do that, which I think this is a good example. There is still social interaction with this type of environment. She had a lab partner. She was benefiting positively and negatively from interacting with men. And we had a lot of opportunity to visit and to talk about this content through the year. And I needed to, and it pointed out to me that I needed to pay more attention to potholes. So it kind of helped me moving forward in terms of making some decisions about her schooling. And hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. So why did we transition into homeschooling? Part of it was science, right? Part of it was this dissatisfaction with the curriculum. And we've had a lot of experience with different types of curriculum. And what I'll say here is what really made me change my mind about homeschooling, because it seemed to be something very foreign to me, was when we were in a private school. I noticed that other parents were pulling their kids out, parents that I respected, that were also homeschooling. And so it made me look things up, and I looked at the Texas requirements. Homeschooling is actually very easy to do in Texas. They have very minimal requirements. You don't have to report into your school. You don't have to provide a curriculum. But what really was the key for me was the statement that Texas treats homeschool as a private school N of 1. And I started to think about private school, and I started to think about their curriculum, and I started thinking about their transcripts, and I thought they just made that up. One of the private schools that she went to used TEKS, which is the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. One of the private schools that she went to didn't have a really set curriculum that was based on research, et cetera. So I started to think, well, I would have liked for her to have had more science. Why can't she take coding? Why didn't she take more foreign language? Why do we have to wait until she's in high school to take it? So with homeschool, I could have that flexibility. I also discovered that in the 90s, Homeschool actually doubled. The number of individuals who homeschool doubled. We know very little about homeschoolers, though, because they tend to lobby really well. They tend to work together in a bipartisan manner because everybody that homeschools is interested in doing their own curriculum, but for different reasons. So they actually tend to be a pretty powerful group. If you look at some of the legislation, like No Child Left Behind, there are references to homeschoolers to exempt them from the teacher quality requirement. So you'll find that I do a lot of actually research with national databases, National Center for Education Statistics. There's very little on homeschoolers because they do not want that type of invasion. Even so, Lubbock tends to have a very large homeschool network. Over 1,700 families are a part of what's called LHN, which is the Lubbock Homeschool Network. We're a part of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about the services that they provide. So when you think about one of the first steps about doing things at home, whether you homeschool 100% of the time or you're trying to take on some teaching at home, you think about what makes me qualified. And this slide is really difficult for me because there's so much to say about content knowledge versus knowledge for teaching. And I can tell you guys that you guys have content knowledge, and in a lot of areas, you have more content knowledge than the teachers have in those domains, whether it's science, whether it's math, English, foreign language, etc. And that's because there's a lot of reasons for that. But there's another type of knowledge that teachers often have, and you guys probably have as well in your classrooms. So years ago, when I started teaching statistics to undergrads, I immediately realized that when you use the computational formula for sum of squares, that undergraduate students forget their order of operations. So immediately I would tell them when we would introduce the computational formula to remember your order of operations. So that's knowledge for teaching. I know where students are going to have problems. I know how to break things down so that it's just enough. And what we saw in my example with AP biology is that my knowledge for teaching biology was not probably what it should have been, because I was thinking that I didn't have that knowledge, that it was too much too fast. And so I didn't have that. So that's where I think we at home sometimes struggle. But let me also tell you that there's a lot to be said for content knowledge. And there's a lot of projects like the West Texas Middle School Math Partnership I was a part of, that if you have a deep conceptual understanding of your content, you probably are gonna have pretty good knowledge for teaching. So let me give you a couple of examples. Ma, in 1999, which she wrote a book about differences in Chinese and American elementary math teachers. And of course, much has changed in 20 years, but at that time, I can't remember the percentage, and I probably should have looked it up, but a pretty good percentage of elementary school teachers were unable to divide fractions. My sister taught middle level math. She retired last month as soon as she hit her 30 years. On her birthday because of the demands of COVID, which some of you are experiencing as parents. And she'll tell you that she didn't have advanced math in background. I took a trig class in college, and I probably have more advanced, that's not even advanced math, but more math than she's had. Part of the West Texas Middle School Math Partnership, we discovered a lot of the math teachers didn't have at middle level, didn't have a lot of the advanced math. So why are these things important? Well, because middle level math, now we're teaching 8th grade algebra. 8th grade algebra, if you take algebra in 8th grade, it's one of the biggest predictors of a STEM career. If you don't know fractions, then that's actually one of the biggest predictors of success in advanced math classes, is your understanding of fractions at a young age. So if teachers are struggling with these concepts, then it's going to have an impact on students. So the argument here is that as parents, probably many of us have some experiences or some education that puts us in a pretty good position to work with our students. Another concern that I had, and I think that qualifies me in terms of teaching my own child, is that I'm familiar with research. Many of you, all of you are probably familiar with research. We don't always use what works in classrooms that's based on evidence. Oftentimes they're product driven. And what that means is there are big publishers that want to sell certain types of curriculum that are not necessarily associated with evidence, despite some calls for evidence-based evidence-based products. So there's a What Works Clearinghouse, which is a place where you can look for actual evidence-based, based off of randomized controlled trials. So those are things that I feel like as a parent, I can actually look up as a researcher and understand probably better than many of the schools. Do a better job in some of the schools. So if you're not confident in content, if you aren't confident in kind of looking in these other areas, in terms of teaching, we don't always have to teach when we're doing these things at home. As I mentioned before, my daughter has had certified teachers available through online programs. And this was something that was really new to me, was that there are actually certified teachers in our community that actually cater to the homeschool population. I mentioned the Homeschool Network. They have something called Homeschool Connections at the start, or Homeschool Happenings at the start of the academic year. They didn't have it this year because of COVID. They invite anybody that serves the homeschool community. So that might be 4-H. You might be surprised, but South Plains College is there. They work really well with the homeschool population in town. But there are also a couple of certified teachers. This has sounded really strange to me. It wasn't something I followed through it, but some of them teach in their homes. Some of them teach, they'll reserve a classroom at Mardell. I didn't know that Mardell had classrooms. Some of them work with cooperatives, and some families work together to teach their students. So part of my daughter's cross country team, that a lot of the parents there are part of the same cooperative. One of the moms is a secondary science teacher. One of the moms has a degree in microbiology. The dads have, they're actually engineers, and they actually co-op together. And they get their kids together and they take turns teaching. So there are a number of co-ops. Some of those are informal. They actually, I know this group has a board. They vote. They are very well organized. But also there are some cooperatives that are based off of national programs. There's something called Classical Connections or Classical Conversations. So there's others that are also national, have kind of national standards and curriculum. Another thing that I used that was very helpful to kind of understand about teaching and whether I would understood the content well enough to work with my daughter was some of the educator prep materials. So my mother-in-law, who's a retired teacher, said, why don't you go and purchase some of the prep materials that teachers use before they take their exams? Because it lists out all of the content that they're supposed to know to teach science, to teach history, to teach math. So I did that. And for $50, I was able to get a whole book for, different subject areas. So that kind of leads me into the idea, if you're going to be kind of organizing things at home and thinking about being more systematic in what you do with your kids at home, then you're probably going to think about then the curriculum. And so not only did these books kind of lead me into what the curriculum is, that you can actually find it. So the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, that actually spells out all of the content that your child will learn at school by age, grade level, right? And by domain. And there are actually programs or organizations that schools will use that will summarize this. And one of the things that I did was created all of when my daughter was in 8th grade, I printed out the abridged version of all of the Texas and Knowledge and Skills, created a notebook for each subject area, and then identified what I was going to do to teach. What sort of programs would we use to teach each one of those skills? Sometimes it was easy, and we're going to see why, because some platforms cater to that. They are connected to TEKS and to the Common Core. TEKS are Texas, Common Core is national. So Texas did not adopt national standards, but the Common Core is something that is also important to consider. It's a large curriculum. So online schooling, there is actually something that we would consider schooling at home versus homeschooling. And so online schooling could be things like Connections Academy, which is a charter school, TTUISD, it's actually K-12, so I'm sorry I got that wrong. University of Texas has a high school and middle school. I don't think they go all the way down into elementary school. I mentioned Florida Virtual School. We're actually a part-time, my daughter's a part-time student at Arizona Prep Digital, that's Arizona State University. We're part-time so that she can take college courses through Arizona State, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. These are, you can pay, and it's about the cost of private school to just enroll your child full-time to take these courses. And these are all courses that are taught by a real teacher. They are certified teachers. They are following, if they're in Texas, they're going to take the STAR exam. They're going to go in and take proctored exams, and they're going to meet the requirements for any high school. Some of them are expensive. I think Connections Academy might be free, but some of these others are expensive. I'll just tell you that Florida Virtual School, just taking an AP class, which I think the AP classes are more expensive, we were out about $1,000 a class. That's a lot of money. That's more expensive than doing dual credit. So I do list Stanford High School here, online high school, just because I feel like, and I countered this in some of my searches, and there's some other private high schools that do tend to be associated with more rigor. They are very expensive, and they, in the case of Stanford High School, you have to apply to get in. What's interesting about Stanford High School is it costs, I believe, about $25,000 a year. So I thought I would mention that. Also, in addition to standards that you can get through online schooling, there are some online platforms that don't have live teachers. So these are based on, you can get all of your coursework there based on standardized curriculum, but they are videos and online textbooks and online materials. So we have used all of these in some shape or form. So Khan Academy is free. Most of you are familiar with that. That's probably used by, maybe even recommended by your school. You can create yourself as a teacher. You can create a program for your child. You can pick the courses that they're in. You can go through and follow along in their coursework and see what content they know, what they need to learn. My problem with Khan Academy is that it is very dry and it doesn't connect things to applied activities very well. And it doesn't have a lot of paper pencil. So what we use Khan Academy, I think for math in particular, it's great, but you just do some quizzes online. I feel like you need an actual paper pencil activities. And so I'll show you what we did to supplement that. Time for Learning was something we used when my daughter was a little bit younger. She didn't, well, in 8th grade, she didn't like it because the videos were very cartoon and they tended to cater to younger children. And so she thought that it was distracting that they had this sort of cartoon, storyline with the content. That can run about $20 to $30 a month. I used CK12, which I mentioned earlier, as part of the science program. Now they've expanded. CK12 is free. You can get an online textbook. Once again, you can set up what sort of lessons you want. You can pick lessons for your child. You can go through and look at their progress. You can assign quizzes, etc. IXL is about $20 a month. A lot of public schools use this, and some public schools will actually have a contract with IXL and then provide passwords for their students. IXL, what I really like about it is that it has diagnostics. So what that means is you can actually see the content that your child knows, but also how that compares to grade level. And that's really important. So it's mostly practice, IXL. Study.com is expensive, $60 a month, but you can take a number of courses and a wide range of age levels. So Study.com also has the option to take a proctored exam, pay a little extra money, and get what they say is college credit. It is, I believe, through maybe a junior college or institution. We don't do that because we don't think it's probably going to transfer, but we do use it because all of the videos and all of the information is created by people who have graduate degrees predominantly, or a strong history of teaching, or have some association with university level teaching. So Study.com, for example, we did an English language arts course through that for 8th grade. We also found a literature course which allowed me to pick a lot of the readings. So we purchased those books and we read, and then she did the quizzes online, learned a little bit about the authors, and so kind of used it in connection with kind of paper pencil books and things that we're able to talk about and work with together at home. Finally, Alex is something we just started to use, and it's a McGraw-Hill product. You probably may sound familiar. Some of you may use it. A lot of universities use it. Arizona State uses it. My daughter's taking a college algebra class. She's in Alex with college algebra. So what's nice about Alex is that it is self-learning. And so if you make a mistake, then you have to keep working on that content level. It doesn't allow you to go on. So, but it does dip all the way down. I believe it has K-12. I didn't get to experiment with those courses when my daughter was younger. So, but it does offer courses for younger kids. What we don't like about Alex is it gets a lot of negative attention because most students hate it because it's very dry and they get locked out. So if you miss enough questions, it'll stop you from moving forward. And so it can be a little frustrating. So that's kind of like when you're thinking about kind of doing things at home and you want to stay with the curriculum, it makes a lot of sense to use those programs. But sometimes you might think that you value different things. That's why people homeschool. My first experience with homeschool was actually when my daughter did Lubbock Ballet, and she was little, and Ballet Lubbock. And a lot of the girls that were extremely serious about dance, they were homeschooled so that they could have the time to devote to dance. So you might see that with music. If you have a child that's really focused in the arts, that they won't get that at school. My daughter was very interested in computer science. So some of you might be familiar with Scratch, which is an MIT product or platform. And Scratch teaches coding, and it's a lot of fun. And my daughter started to work with it. She used it for a science fair project where she coded a program that guessed random numbers. So she was trying to see how easy it was to guess passwords at different lengths. And she also did a lot of animation through Scratch. And so I discovered that she kind of really liked this. And so I said, well, let's do a program where you learn coding. So let's learn Python. So we found Junie Learning. It's probably the most expensive thing that we do. And it's $300 a month, but it was started by two women from UC who graduated with their computer science degrees from UC Berkeley. And they lamented the fact that there's really not a lot of coding in school. They also were frustrated with the fact that there are a few women in coding. So only 20% of undergraduates in computer science are women. So they started this program. So my daughter she's FaceTimes a teacher. Her teacher now is from UC Berkeley. She had a teacher from Johns Hopkins. She had a teacher from Middlebury, and she meets once a week and they code together. She's gone through 3 Python classes, and now she's doing something called USICO, which is the United States Computer Olympiad. So they'll compete in December. So she's taking a USICO bronze and studying how to compete. So she wants to major in computer science. This is not something that she would get in public school. And this one-to-one, it was really very life-changing for her to have this exposure to these young women who have been amazing. And so we do Junie Learning, we pay for that. Another experience that we had that I think is really something I feel bad about in public schools is that we don't teach foreign languages early enough. So we know the malleability of the brain. We know that children, I think probably by the age of 9, if you aren't teaching and experiencing and hearing other sounds, then you're going to lose the ability to discriminate those sounds. So we enrolled Ellie in something called Homeschool Spanish Academy. It's not particularly cheap, but it's not as expensive as Junie. And actually some schools use Homeschool Spanish Academy that do not have access to Spanish teachers. It's a platform that comes out of Guatemala. So twice a week, and she could do it more times than that, but we do twice a week. She gets 100 minutes face-to-face time with a teacher from Guatemala. She actually just finished up before I started this talk. And so she's gone through 3, she'll be in her 3rd year. She's in her 3rd year of high school Spanish. They do tests, they do have a curriculum, she does have a transcript, and she does conjugate verbs a lot. So that's been another really amazing thing that we've been able to do with homeschool, that she would not have had the opportunity to do. And then you'll notice something else that's going on here. How did she get through 3 years of Spanish? How did she get through 3 classes of Python? Well, we go all summer. There's, like what, she enjoys it. So we just continue to work through the summer. And when we think about Spanish, taking a language in high school, when you're in a class of 20 students, she has one-to-one time. She also is able to work all day. She's also not transitioning. There's some estimates that you can lose hours of a day from your education in just transition times in public schools. So especially when you think of younger children, that a lot of the homeschooling families with younger children are able to move through their content quicker. And so she can move through content quicker, but we just continue to do other content. So she's able to get a little bit of ahead. And we don't do those things because we want her to be ahead. We do those things because she's enjoying them. And it makes sense to keep things going. So to not, to lose that information. We also do piano. When she was younger, did violin through Stellar, which is a Suzuki program. There's also a string project at Texas Tech, but I think they mostly work through the public schools. But we can take as her music credit, she can go and spend an hour at her piano lesson, and she can go at any time of the day, which is very convenient for all of us. I mentioned the outreach programs. Those are good things to keep in mind, but also the top line is teachers pay teachers. I mentioned earlier that I'd like to do things that are paper pencil, especially with math, and that Khan Academy really didn't give her a lot of opportunity to practice. And so at my sister's recommendation, I went to Teachers Pay Teachers, and this is where teachers sell curriculum. And there's something there called a series called All Things Algebra, which coincidentally, I think my sister's school actually uses. And that's where we downloaded an algebra curriculum. It's about $400 for the whole curriculum. And we downloaded geometry. And so it comes with conceptual overview of each content area, homework, quizzes, and exams. And so we basically, and of course it's all scheduled, it's all connected to the curriculum. I think it's Common Core in this particular case, and it's been a really good experience to be able to work through that. So how do I know if she's learning? Well, I don't know if you know this, but you can go online and you can just download release STAR tests. So STAR tests that your children take in school, you can download them. You can download the key. So then you can also see if they would have passed if they took that test in public school. We've taken advantage of that as benchmarks. And also at the end when I feel like she's finished a particular curriculum. Texas Tech, the K-12, TTU, the ISD also offers credit by exam. So you could go in and for $50, have your child take a proctored exam to make sure that they are learning. And if you're concerned, your child is in public school and you're concerned about where they're at, you can use some of these strategies as well. We used also the PSAT, but if you're fully homeschooled, it's kind of a challenge now with COVID. We were taking her PSATs with private schools and they didn't want to have the homeschoolers come in this year, not surprisingly. So, but you do have the right to take them at your public school. Alex and IXL also provide excellent diagnostics. So I'd already kind of touched on college. So I want to make a few other comments here. I mentioned Arizona Prep Digital. So she's done something called Open Scale, which is kind of a way to kind of ease into college courses. So one of the advantages of homeschool is that, in public school, you can take a college English class at your junior college and it can count for your high school English. But when you're homeschooled, right, you could take history and you might take 2 English classes. You might take chemistry in college. And Arizona Prep Digital has a series of online courses that can be taken concurrently with other students at Arizona State. It's they have a series of courses. And you could just take that and it counts for double. So there's a lot of homeschool students that graduate from high school with let's see, those associates, sorry, lost my train of thought, the associate's degrees, or with a lot of college credit. Southwinds College does tend to work well with homeschoolers. They often post on the homeschool network and say, hey, you know, would this time be good for homeschoolers to take Spanish? So they're really very, very helpful and responsive. We chose to work with Arizona State because we were considering the transferability. So she's actually completed English 101. They have an open scale course that allows you to enroll in the course but not pay for it unless you pass it. And they have a lot of 8-week course options. And we are doing this through Arizona Prep Digital. So because she is a high school student, so we had to provide a transcript. So if you guys are kind of worried about, well, what do you do for a transcript, which is another story, Arizona Prep Digital ASU accepted her transcript that we are working on as a homeschool family. And she already completed her English. They have they work on a different semester system there. And so they have a number of 8-week courses. So right now she's in college algebra and she's starting Western civilization. So this is a pretty neat deal so far. I do want to mention, so for those of you with younger kids, there's Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth, or CITY. And if your child is gifted and they maybe scored, so there's a standardized test that they offer, then there are courses through Johns Hopkins. You could take AP through Johns Hopkins. If your child has a high enough PSAT score, we considered doing that, but it was about $3,000 for one class. So it didn't seem to be a good option for us. So there are lots of enrichment sort of things that you can do. There's a pretty good transition, or easy transition, surprisingly, from homeschool into college. So that might be a concern. And certainly there's more to be said there. So you're probably wondering about social emotional learning considerations, and I have a lot to say there, but I don't have time really to talk about that. But as I mentioned, the Lubbock Homeschool Network is pretty broad. There's a large number of families here in town. They do meetups. You might be surprised to learn this, but a lot of businesses have homeschool days. So there's a skate day. There's also Addle Farms has the corn maze. You can bring homeschool kids out on a day. I believe like there was one, I couldn't remember which one it was, one of the mud rooms or where they do ceramics. Oftentimes they used to have a homeschool day. A lot of the parents have a park meetup where they'll put on the website that they're going to be. They're at a park, and so they'll do that. I obviously mentioned the cooperatives. I've also noticed that some of the private schools have hybrid models where students take classes part of the week, but don't attend full time. The Lubbock Homeschool Network also supports a student council. There's prom, there's graduation. My daughter's part of a Pocono group, and what they do is they meet every month and they play Pocono. It's an interesting experience. There's 12 girls that get together to do that. We're mostly involved with Lubbock Titans. My daughter runs cross country and track. You've seen some of these photographs. They also have volleyball, basketball, football, cheer. There's homecoming. There's a homecoming king and queen, which they're working on nominating now, and dances that she's attended, which I've also chaperoned, which have been interesting. So there are things that you can do. The Lubbock Titans compete in UIL. They compete against other teams. A lot of the private schools will be at LCU on Friday. Suzanne will probably be at LCU on Friday. And we'll be in Lamesa on Saturday for the O'Donnell meet. So we our kids are not a part of UIL. There's been a Tim Tebow Act that's been proposed every year, and it gets shot down in the Texas legislature. But that's another issue. So gosh, there's so much to be said. And I think I missed one slide. So much to be said about what you can do at home. And I know we've kind of jumped off the deep end and we do it all the time, but there's some hidden benefits to jumping off the deep end. You're going to laugh. But of course, this upper picture is us at cross country practice at 6:30 in the morning. So we don't always sleep in. And today was a cross country day. But there's research that shows that when high schools actually, start 15 minutes later, there's fewer numbers of car accidents because adolescents need a little more sleep. So we get to take advantage of that. We don't have to rush out in the mornings, and it saves us, I guess, too, on clothing. So we don't have to worry about that. We can, my daughter can hang out in her sweats. I mentioned we can go for a walk. I actually wrote a book on physical activity and learning. And it's so important to be able to take breaks during the day, to move around, to be active. And sometimes we don't have that opportunity when we're in more formal schooling environments. We can do volunteer activities during the day. A lot of homeschoolers are prized by local employers. We can go on field trips. This here is a picture in the bottom left of us at Carlsbad Caverns. This is interesting. She had a science fair project. Her team actually won the Lexus Eco Challenge, I think in the 7th grade, when she was still in a private school. And the next year, even though we were homeschooling, they continued the project. And so she was a homeschooler, but she was working with the private school kids. And we took a trip over to Carlsbad Caverns. In this photograph, you can see the biologists there. They're actually got to go behind the ropes and back there to collect algae. And so we were able to do some of these things so easily. And we also went to Santa Fe to look at the New Mexico Museum. I think I brought my book. One of the neat things that we did was we focused on the American colonies and kind of looked at colonization from a different perspective than what we would have in public schools. So we spent a lot of time looking at Mexico and New Mexico. And so we were able to take the field trip. Some people call this road schooling. You can take that time to do that. We talk all the time. I know the curriculum. I know what she's studying. So when we're at home and we're talking around the table, then all sorts of interesting things come up. I mentioned that she can study computer science with women. And I don't know if that if you kind of caught on to that, is that she has the opportunity to learn with women right now. So that she can build her efficacy. So because it's not going to be that way when she starts to take college courses. So this is an opportunity at a time when she can build her efficacy and her belief system about her coding abilities. She studies all summer. I mentioned that as well. And even though we aren't really trying to get her ahead, she is really classified as a junior, even though she's a sophomore. And she probably has about 10 hours of college credit. So that's, kind of a hidden benefit. Now, we don't know if that's going to be accepted wherever she decides to go to school, but she still had what I perceive as a high quality curriculum for her high school. So I feel like I'm all over the place when I talk about things because I kind of distract myself because there's so many things to talk about. I think one of the biggest things I didn't talk about is, how do you do this in terms of time? And, how do you manage that? You can obviously tell, and being from an education background, how, I enjoy this and it's a part of my research. So there's a little bit of a difference there probably than maybe some of you. So I noticed there are, I'm assuming, some questions. So
I think you have some questions from participants in the room who are what they've called accidental homeschoolers or doing virtual learning this year. So it might be interesting for you to address that.
Okay. So it's kind of the accidental, the people that are doing the virtual. Yeah, I think one of the things that you have to really consider about with the virtual homeschooling that's associated with COVID, and I'm going to take this from anecdotes from my sister, who this is really kind of was the straw, right, that really ended things for her in her teaching career, was that it was just impossible for her to teach face-to-face and online at the same time. And if you have a background in cognitive science, right, so in cognition, you'll understand that you can't split your attention like that as a teacher. All of the transition time that we know as a school psychologist that creates behavior problems, those are opportunities for behavior problems. So what I'm saying is that when you are experienced with virtual online learning, if it is through your public school as a result of COVID, and I'm not experiencing this personally, so I'm just making a guess, it's not the same thing. It's not the same quality as if you have a teacher that is only teaching online. So maybe you're fortunate enough in the school district maybe they have allowed that, maybe your teacher isn't split, but then also you have, what sort of products are they using? What sort of materials are there, what sort of platform is there. Things like Florida Virtual School, things like the Texas Tech K-12, they have spent time in creating those platforms and curating videos, curating activities that are feasible online, and that's not the luxury that the school has had. So as a result, I would kind of say that those are kind of two different things. And that's probably something that you already know. So I don't know if you would want to know, like, what would you do about it? I think that really kind of depends. I think you kind of have to think about, are you ready to do something that's completely different? What sort of financial resources that you have? Or if you think it possible to do things that are, on the side, kind of enrichment, so that you can supplement what they're doing. In my experience, and everyone's child is different. Now, my kids, I was very fortunate. She was very initiative. She's very much an initiative taker. She's very independent. So she could sit very quietly and work on things. Even so, what I found, and there was a time when I had her enrolled in a school where I realized that the rigor probably wasn't what I wanted. And I told myself, well, we'll do things at home to enrich what she's doing at school. And it never happened because I didn't have the time. And then she always felt like she was too young to really understand how that was going to benefit her. So I thought, well, just come home and do IXL for 15 minutes, just the practice. Just come home and do Khan Academy for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And it didn't happen. So for us, it made a lot of sense to jump off the deep end and make this what we do all the time. And that's, kind of part of, I think, what helped us to transition fully into homeschooling. And that may not be an option, for other people.
So could I ask you a question, Tara? So I'm just wondering, I'm one of the accidental homeschoolers. We are homeschooling. We're not doing virtual school through the school district. And that was because of the schedule that was being required by LISD, and requiring, up to 5 synchronous check-ins with a teacher throughout the day. Couldn't do that and teach my classes online. Yeah. Just the schedules weren't congruent. And we're about 6 weeks into homeschooling 3 kids at home and trying to be a full-time faculty member. And I know you don't have a crystal ball, and I don't either, but is it sustainable long-term? And I'm just wondering, it seems like you've been doing this for a long time with your daughter and having a lot of really great success. And what does that take from you on a daily basis in terms of keeping that going? Because it feels very, I think, part of me, when we decided to launch into homeschooling back in July, or August, when we were making this decision, was, we kind of went for like purchasing an all-in-one curriculum because we just didn't have the bandwidth to, choose these a la carte options. And I know if we were to do this long-term, I'd want to get more into the nitty-gritty details of the types of things that you had looked at. But overall, do you find it sustainable, I guess, for parents who are both working full-time jobs, for faculty members, and, people who, are teaching multiple grade levels? Like, how do you handle that? Because I have 2 kindergartners and a 3rd grader, and it's like crazy town here. So.
Well, we started homeschool in 8th grade, and I have 1 kid, and like I said, she can sit for hours reading, so it's obviously a lot easier. But I still remember 8th grade being the person that was responsible for all of the curriculum and sitting down with her. And as I harken back to my story about 8th grade science, and all this time that I was sitting one-to-one with her, that trying to get things to sink in and trying to be creative and find ways to connect. And still not being exactly as successful as I would have liked. Could that have been sustainable? Because I'll have to tell you, when she got into high school and I could farm out these things and she's enrolling in classes, it was, you know, it was a relief. So I could only imagine having 3 kids and really working with the elementary curriculum, which is still obviously a lot more hands-on, you know, and there's a lot more, you know, activity. So in terms of long-term, I would have to, to answer that question is think about the people that I've met that are homeschooling. So I've spent a lot of hours at cross-country meets and cross-country practice and walking and running with all the other moms that do have multiple kids. A lot of the homeschool families that I know have a large number of kids. I'll be honest, a lot of them, most of them, one of the parents does not work. But you know, that's not always the case. And what I also notice is that they take advantage of a lot of the cooperatives. If I had 3 kids that were younger, I would probably look a little bit more into you know, other families, you know, kind of co-oping, you know, some of the you know, some of the activities, some of the teaching. And I think that's hard because, you know, then you kind of start to think about values and, you know, finding other people who are similar. I remember years ago when my daughter was little and there were several people in my college who had young kids. And I thought it would be so cool if we got together and created a, you know, and created a, you know, a co-op where we all taught. We have such great, you know, training and experience, but it's so hard to do that around people's schedules. So I'm not sure quite how to do that, but I would recommend getting connected with, and maybe you are connected with the Lubbock Homeschool Network. And to do that, you have to, they actually kind of closed down letting people in because there were so many people wanting to get into the homeschool network who were doing virtual schooling and things like that. It was kind of overwhelming the system. And they only wanted people that were going to be homeschooling. But you can actually go into, once you have permission, and I can send you a link to request that to get into the page. But what a lot of people will do is just post a question, you know, and just, you know, how is this sustainable? How do you do this? And you'll get 20 people responding, you know, I have 3 kids, I have 4 kids. This is what I do. This is the program that I use. This is what, you know, or a lot of them are very open to meeting with you and even sharing with you what they do, what their experiences are. So I probably don't have a really good answer there, but I think that, but I can also tell you some of these families that I know have 5 kids, they have a large number of kids and they have such a good system that, you know, they do seem to do a really good job. One thing that really struck me getting into the homeschool community and talking with different people was the level of knowledge these people had. I mean, like Alex, for example, was something that I didn't, it's just a McGraw-Hill product. I discovered that on the Homeschool Network because somebody posted it in response to a question. These are people, a lot of these parents are intense. They really do look at curriculum. They share curriculum, they sell curriculum, they interact. This is, they're very involved. So it might be a resource that could be the thing that you're looking for.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hi, Tara. Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
By the way, thank you so much for doing this. In case you're wondering why it's so quiet. So my kids, so I also homeschool. I'm an accidental homeschooler as well, a 3rd grader and one kindergartner. And in case you're wondering why it's so quiet, my kids have been at Camp Grandma this week. So Camp Grandma is amazing. I highly recommend if it's at all possible, Erin. I think it's very helpful. But my question to Tara is, so one of the things that we're struggling with, so we're doing kind of an a la carte thing. I went and tried to do some research on the Texas standards in terms of what I have to teach in terms of curriculum. Needless to say, it's overwhelming. We are using a few platforms, like we're using Generation Genius for science. Mm-hmm. And I'm personally also struggling with that one because we're not scientists, we're in music, my husband and I. In terms of standards, and if our kids go back, well, I mean, we're planning once it's safe for our kids to go back to public school, ensuring that what we're teaching them, especially, I'm not so worried about math and reading because it seems across the board, there's a lot of material, a lot of information, but subjects like science, subjects like history, for instance, I'm just concerned that they're not going to know the right things. And it seems to be rather vague in terms of what kind of things my third grader needs to know, what kind of things my kindergarten needs to know in terms of social science and those things that I really believe are very important. So do you recommend any resources for finding that out? And also a way to assess how where to find the information that's congruent to the Texas standards, specifically like on science and any kind of general studies.
Yeah, so you can, like Time for Learning, I think also, I think IXL will actually ask you what state that you are in. And it will give you all of the, and I was going to see if I could share my screen. I wonder if I could, let's see.
I've been taking shots of your slideshow.
And I can send you because all of this have links in them. But let's see. Let's go here. So I think, let's try Time for Learning. And you can go through. So, and this has, plans for homeschoolers. So you can go subject, right? You can go curriculum, and you can also go homeschool. So you can see here, you can look at homeschooling by state. Here's something about the accidental homeschooler, right? So some of these programs have all of the content area, and then you can look by state. So you can also look at, let's see, IXL does something similar. And IXL is nice because what I like about it is diagnostic. Yeah. And you'll actually even get an email that'll say how long your child's been on and what sort of things that they have learned. But you can then compare where they're at in terms of the curriculum. And so you can see the skills that are actually taught. And these are connected. There is a place here. So here's Texas standards.
Oh, okay.
Right. So you can look IXL alignment to Texas math standard.
Oh, okay.
Content tracked by standard.
Okay.
You can also click on a grade level to view your state standards, find practice skills, and track performance. So it goes all the way pre-K, K, first, second, third, and so on. I mentioned before that TEKS, there are actual, I couldn't find it right away, but I know when I was printing off the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, there are some groups that purposefully condense them into small outlines. And that's actually what I used. And my sister said that, hey, that's what we, as teachers use that too. And so that allowed me to print that out and to put it into a notebook and then kind of match up to make sure we were doing a lot of things. And, kind of going back to what you were saying before, you're concerned about science, you're concerned about history. Those are areas that are not tested by standardized testing in Texas. They really get kicked to the side in early elementary. And so really, I would argue that some of the things that you might actually do, you might find that you are really, helping, helping your child. They might be getting some things they wouldn't necessarily be getting, in school. In fact, I was on a dissertation committee of a student that was, studying I think the efficacy of elementary science, teachers who taught science for teaching science, and it wasn't what you would hope that it would be. So there are a lot of elementary teachers that, they take a lot of different coursework and developmental information, but they aren't necessarily have great conceptual understanding of science. So, those are things to consider.
All right, thank you. The summary that you mentioned of TEKS, do you know by any chance where that's available?
I'll have to find it, but it's a kind of a company that does this for teachers, and it's online, and but it's so much easier to wade through than looking at the state website. It's just so much easier.
I don't want to, I'll Google for it. I don't want to add, I'm sure you're plenty busy, but I'll see if I can find it myself. But thank you.
You're welcome.
I think in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and stop. I mean, clearly you hit a nerve, Tara, particularly for our colleagues who are wearing so many hats right now and find themselves as accidental homeschoolers. I know that the resources you've mentioned are really helpful. And we so appreciate your passion for homeschooling. What a fortunate girl your daughter is to have you partnering with her like this. So thank you for your time today and sharing your expertise with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
A virtual clap.
Well, I would be happy to visit with anyone. I know that there's so many areas and that I didn't cover, and I know the challenges in time, and I haven't gotten into how I've managed that and how I feel like that's affected me in my career. But I mean, it's a different conversation. You know, important.
Much appreciated. All right, everyone, have a good day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.